Our daily Bible reading for February 28th. Our reading today comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8. Mark chapter 8, beginning in verse 1. In those days, when again a great crowd had gathered, and they had nothing to eat, he called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the crowd, because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from far away. And his disciples answered him, How can one feed these people with bread here on this desolate place? And he asked them, How many loaves do you have? They said, 7. And he directed the crowd to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he broke them, and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And they set them before the crowd. And they had a few small fish. And having blessed them, he said that these also should be set before them. And they ate and were satisfied. And they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. And there were about 4,000 people. And he sent them away. And immediately he got into the boat with his disciples, and he went to the district of Dalmanutha. The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly, I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. And they left him. He got into the boat again and went to the other side. Now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only 1 loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they began to discuss with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember, when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 7. And he said to them, Do you not yet understand? And they came to Bethsaida, and some of the people brought to him a blind man, and begged him to touch him. And they took the blind man by the hand, and led him out of the village. And when he had spit in his eyes, and laid his hands on him, he asked him, Do you see anything? And he looked up and said, I see people, but they look like trees walking. Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, Do not enter even the village. And Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, Who do people say that I am? And he told him, John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets. And he asked them, But who do you say that I am? Peter answered him, You are the Christ. And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. And calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit for a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Some thoughts for today. There are several terms that Jesus uses that on first glance seem to be in contradiction to our normal human thought process. First shall be last. Blessed are those who mourn. Pray for your enemies. These and many more stand against much of what our culture embraces. Our society's thinking seems to promote happiness by acquisition. The more you have, the happier you are. At least that's what advertising has pushed. Here in Mark 8, we find the same story retold from Matthew chapter 16. For the first time, we have Jesus plainly telling his disciple what awaits him at the hand of the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem. Aghast at the thought that his teacher should suffer such humiliation and pain, Peter boldly proclaims that this cannot be. It is at this point that the whole of Christianity is put into perspective. For Jesus is quick to point out where the thinking of the disciples originates. It is that selfish human emotions that are rooted in Satan that Peter is actually considering. What Jesus shows his students is diametrically opposed to what the world would have them to do. He tells them that self-sacrifice is the way, not fighting for their survival. Those who would follow Jesus must be prepared to give all. Peter was prepared to give his life by physically fighting those who would harm his master. Jesus tells him that to desire to save one's life is not the way to go, but to take up their cross and through self-sacrifice, this would be accomplished. In a time where it's all about me, it's the rage, those who would sacrifice all will certainly be in the minority. But this is what the Master requires of all who would follow. For the whole world is not enough to pay for one soul. A question of the day. Have you ever thought of what it would take to completely give yourself over to Christ? And finally, a thought to meditate on this day. Consider the opposites listed earlier in our text and others in Scripture and find the wisdom contained in them. And those are our thoughts for today, February 28th.